In 1853, a French bureaucrat named Georges-Eugène Haussmann was handed the keys to a city that was falling apart. Paris in 1853 wasn't the Paris you know. There were no boulevards, no cafes on wide sidewalks, no uniform stone facades stretching to the horizon. What stood in their place was something closer to a medieval village that had grown into a capital without ever being redesigned for the job and was killing the people living inside it. Napoleon III gave Haussmann 17 years and a mandate that had never been given to anyone before. By the time it was over, 20,000 buildings were gone, 350,000 people had been pushed out of the center, and the financing structure Haussmann invented to pay for all of it is still being used to rebuild cities today. In Atlanta, in Tokyo, in New York. What he built is what the world now thinks a city is supposed to look like. But Haussmann wasn't hired to make Paris beautiful. He was hired to make sure a specific kind of thing could never happen in Paris again. To understand what Haussmann did, you gotta start with what Paris actually was in 1850. None of what we associate with Paris today existed yet. The average alley in central Paris was less than 3 meters wide, narrow enough that you could touch both walls with your arms out. Buildings climbed 5 and 6 stories on either side, packed close enough together to block most of the daylight from reaching the street. The population had doubled in 40 years. Industrialization was pulling French peasants into Paris faster than the city could possibly absorb them. Most of the city had no sewer system at all, and drinking water came directly from the same river receiving the city's waste. In 1832, cholera killed 20,000 Parisians in 6 months. In 1849, another 20,000 died in a second outbreak. These were not disasters in the usual sense. They were the predictable result of a city whose infrastructure had fallen 50 years behind its population. And the disease, devastating as it was not even the problem keeping Napoleon III awake at night. France had been through 3 full-scale revolutions in living memory: 1789, 1830, and 1848. Each one had brought down its government through more or less the same mechanism. Workers would drag furniture, carts, and paving stones into the narrow streets of central Paris and stag them into barricades 2 and 3 meters high. The streets were too tight for cavalry to charge through, artillery had no clear line of sight, and any troops arriving from one direction were immediately exposed to fire from the buildings pressing in on either side. The medieval geometry of Paris was a defensive weapon, available to anyone willing to use it. Napoleon III had watched the 1848 revolution from exile in England. He came back to France in its aftermath, won the presidency through the chaos the revolution had created, and then seized permanent power through a coup 3 years later. Nobody alive understood better than he did exactly how governments in Paris fell. So in 1853, he hired Georges-Eugène Haussmann as prefect of the Seine and gave him a mandate to modernize the city. Haussmann would spend the next 17 years doing exactly that, and in the process, he would invent something that had never existed before. What Haussmann actually built came down to 2 inventions. One was a way of physically reorganizing the city. The other was a new way of paying for it. Both are still in use. The first one was a street geometry that made revolution logistically impossible. The mechanism of every Parisian uprising had been roughly identical: narrow streets, barricades, trapped troops, fallen government. Haussmann's response was surgical. He demolished the medieval street network in central Paris and replaced it with boulevards 30 meters wide. A street that wide cannot be barricaded with furniture. Artillery positioned at one end has a clean line of sight to the other. Cavalry can move at full speed, and troops can reach any quarter of central Paris in minutes rather than hours. The new barracks Haussmann built were not placed randomly either. They sit at strategic intersections along the major boulevard routes, positioned so that military force could be deployed across the city faster than any uprising could organize itself. The Champs-Élysées runs in a direct line from the Arc de Triomphe to the Place de la Concorde. From the top of the arc, every major boulevard radiating outward is visible at the same time. It was completed in 1836, and Haussmann's boulevard plan was designed around it. What tourists photograph today as the defining aesthetic of Paris is also at its origin a piece of command and control infrastructure. The beauty came later, and the width came first. That's the first invention. The second is the reason the model spread to every city on Earth. Haussmann needed to finance the demolition of 20,000 buildings and the simultaneous construction of an entirely new street network. The amount of money required had no precedent in urban history, and Paris did not have it sitting in the treasury. So Haussmann assembled a financing structure that had never existed before. He issued municipal bonds. Those bonds would be repaid from the property tax revenue the new buildings would generate once they were completed. Which is to say, the city was borrowing against the future value of properties that didn't yet exist at the time of the borrowing. There was no established legal or accounting framework for this. Haussmann invented one. The way it worked was this. The city would acquire land in the demolition zones at prices set by assessors who reported to Haussmann's office. Those prices reflected what the land was worth as medieval property, not what it would be worth once a 30-meter boulevard ran past it. The gap between those two numbers was enormous. Land was acquired below its future value, cleared, and replaced with the uniform stone buildings that now define central Paris. Those buildings were then sold or leased at the premium values the boulevard itself had created. So the public project generated a private return. This structure, borrowing against future tax revenue from properties that don't yet exist, is now called tax increment financing, or TIF. It's the standard instrument of city redevelopment across the US, Europe, and Asia. When Atlanta built the Beltline, the funding came from TIF. When Chicago built Millennium Park, same thing. When New York built Hudson Yards, a project we covered on the channel, the financing structure at the core traced directly back to what Haussmann had assembled in Paris in the 1850s. He did not invent real estate development, he invented the financial instrument that made modern city redevelopment possible at scale. And within a generation, every major government that wanted to rebuild a city was using it. There's one more piece worth understanding before we look at the cities that copied the model. The 350,000 working class residents who got cleared out of central Paris had to go somewhere, and where they went was the periphery. Those neighborhoods received almost no boulevard investment, no sewer infrastructure, and they sat outside the new tax base from the very beginning. The banlieues that ring Paris today carried the geographic logic of decisions made in the 1850s. And that geography was not accidental, it was the other side of the financing structure. The land had to be cleared, the people on it had to go somewhere, and where they went was determined by the same logic that determined everything else Haussmann built: what served the project. Within a generation of Haussmann's dismissal in 1870, the model he had assembled in Paris was operating on 4 continents. It wasn't really that the other cities admired Paris aesthetically, it was that the financing worked. Governments that wanted to modernize, attract investment, and generate tax revenue from land they controlled discovered that Haussmann's mechanism delivered all 3 at once. So the blueprint traveled because it was useful and not because it was beautiful. The first and most direct copy was Barcelona. While Haussmann was still demolishing medieval Paris, a Catalan engineer named Ildefons Cerdà was designing the expansion of Barcelona on almost identical principles. The Eixample district, built from the 1860s onward, is a precise grid of wide boulevards and uniform city blocks with corners that create small octagonal intersections throughout the neighborhood. Cerdà had studied what was happening in Paris directly. He coined the word urbanization in its modern sense. He was actually the first person in history to use it that way. And his grid became the most studied urban plan of the 19th century. The Eixample today is the most expensive residential real estate in Barcelona. The wide boulevards Cerdà designed for light, air, and military mobility are now the addresses commanding the highest prices in the city. The mechanism Haussmann proved in Paris produced the same outcome in Barcelona within decades. And Buenos Aires in Argentina was even more explicit about it. Argentine elites in the 19th century sent their planners directly to Paris to study Haussmann's methods. The stated objective, written into the planning documents of the era, was to make Buenos Aires the Paris of South America. But the phrase was not being used as a metaphor, it was a planning specification. The Avenida de Mayo, completed in 1894, runs in a direct line from the Casa Rosada to the National Congress, and was modeled precisely on the Parisian Boulevard standard: wide, tree-lined, with uniform facades on either side. The displacement logic followed identically. Working-class residents of the cleared neighborhoods got relocated to peripheral areas that received a fraction of the infrastructure investment concentrated along the new boulevards. So the geography that produces Buenos Aires' current neighborhood stratification was set in the 19th century rebuild. But Tokyo is the most striking case, because it shows how completely the model had detached from its European origins. Japan's Meiji government, which came to power in 1868 with an explicit mandate to modernize on Western models, hired French urban advisors and studied Haussmann's Paris as the primary reference for what a modern capital should look like. The wide boulevards of central Tokyo follow Haussmann's specifications. When the 1923 Kanto earthquake destroyed most of central Tokyo, the rebuild was organized around the same boulevard framework, explicitly cited in planning documents as the Haussmann approach. A model developed to suppress Parisian working-class uprisings was being deployed in Tokyo 70 years later because the financing and land value mechanisms it carried with it were too useful to abandon. Chicago completes the picture on the American side. The 1871 fire that destroyed most of central Chicago created the same opportunity Napoleon III had manufactured through expropriation law: a cleared urban landscape available for rebuilding on new principles. Daniel Burnham's 1909 Plan of Chicago, one of the most influential urban plans in American history, drew directly and explicitly on Haussmann. Burnham had studied Paris extensively and said so in his own writing. The plan's wide diagonal boulevards cutting across the Chicago grid, its lakefront parks, its uniform setback requirements along major streets, all of it traces back to the blueprint assembled in Paris between 1853 and 1870. And the financing mechanism followed the aesthetic. Chicago today operates some of the largest TIF districts in the United States. And it's not just Chicago. Atlanta's Beltline, one of the most significant urban projects in the US, is financed through TIF. Hudson Yards in New York used a version of the same structure. The public authority assembled the land. Future tax revenue from buildings that did not exist at groundbreaking was pledged against the construction financing. The private return was generated by the public investment. So the names can change from city to city, but the mechanism stays the same. By 1869, the financing structure that had built modern Paris was coming apart. Haussmann's bond mechanism depended on continuous growth in property tax receipts to service the debt from the previous round of borrowing. Each phase of construction had to generate enough new tax revenue to cover what was borrowed to fund it. When development slowed and the gap started becoming visible, a legislative audit found that long-term municipal debt had been recorded as short-term obligations. The true scale of what Paris owed was not accurately reflected in the city's official accounts. Haussmann was dismissed by Napoleon III in January 1870. 11 months later, France lost the Franco-Prussian War. Napoleon III was taken prisoner by Prussian forces and never returned to power. He died in exile in England 3 years later. The political structure that had commissioned and protected the entire project was gone within a year of Haussmann's dismissal. Haussmann himself lived another 21 years. He wrote his memoirs in 3 volumes, received visitors, and was celebrated in certain circles as the man who modernized Paris. The off-balance sheet vehicle he invented, the Caisse des Travaux, went on to become a template studied by municipal finance offices across Europe. The displacement of 350,000 people also sits in the historical record. So does the accounting mechanism that made it financially invisible while it was happening. Both travel with the blueprint. The city he built outlasted the empire that commissioned it, the emperor who authorized it, and the man who executed it. And then the world copied it. Every major city redevelopment project undertaken since 1870 has used some version of what Haussmann assembled in Paris. The pattern keeps repeating in roughly the same form. The language of public health and modernization gets used to establish legal authority over private land. Construction is financed against future tax revenue from properties that don't yet exist. Aesthetic uniformity drives up land values and eventually starts marketing itself as culture. Lower income residents end up relocated to peripheral areas that receive a fraction of the infrastructure investment concentrated in the redevelopment zone. The specific names and dates and cities keep changing, but the underlying structure stays remarkably constant. So what makes Paris worth understanding as an urban case study is precisely that it's not exceptional. It is beautiful, but structurally not exceptional. The mechanism Haussmann invented was adopted so completely and so universally that it stopped being identified as Haussmann's mechanism and became simply how cities are built. When a contemporary city assembles land through eminent domain, finances construction through TIF, and sells development rights at the premium values the public investment created, nobody in the room is thinking about a French prefect dismissed in disgrace in 1870. They're simply using a standard instrument of municipal finance that just happens to have been invented in Paris in 1850s. The tourists walking the Champs-Élysées are standing beside the product of a specific financial and political transaction executed by a small group of people over a 17-year window. And the beauty is real, the sewers do work, and the boulevards are genuinely livable in a way the medieval streets that replaced never were.